ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow enthusiasts of the ever-evolving digital landscape. Welcome to today's panel on tech diplomacy in the times of crisis. My name is Viktor Kharyton, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. And in the next hour, we're set to embark on a kind of academic journey through the multifaceted realms of European digital policies and exploring their implications on a global stage and their crucial role in crisis and emergency situations. Our distinguished panelists today are Elke Schraik on my left, and on my very left is Christian Resch. Elke is a researcher in a Center for European Integration Research with a diverse professional background spanning private and educational sectors. Elke holds a master's degree in French and English, coupled with a master's degree in public relations and public affairs. Her academic pursuits extend to global studies, history, political science at the University of Vienna, political economy and EU studies at renowned institutions such as London School of Economics, Sciences Po, and Cambridge Summer Institute. Beyond her research, she's passionately committed to fostering young people's knowledge about EU and EU foreign politics, serving as a president of the grassroots think tank Bonta. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Christian is a professional officer and a military academic graduate with a master's degree in leadership, chemical, biological, and radiological nuclear defense. In addition to his defense background, he holds a Master of Engineering in Industrial Process and Plant Safety, and is on the verge of completing his PhD in the same field. He's also a managing director of Disaster Competence Network Austria, where he leads the efforts to facilitate knowledge and technology transfer in security and disaster research. Welcome, Christian. Well, with that said, I think, Elke, the floor is yours for introductory remarks, and then we'll move to Christian.
So thank you very much, Viktor. Thanks for having me also. Viktor also mentioned that my focus is on EU studies. So currently I'm researching on the EU's external digital policy towards the US. Before I researched more on the EU's external digital policy towards Africa, so it's quite interesting also to see the difference between what the EU does towards a digital leader and what it does towards a digital legate. So in how far the strategy and then the policies are different. So concerning the US, I was told that this might be the more relevant part and more interesting for you, so I'll focus on that, and it's my current research anyway, so great timing. So when it comes to the US, and what the EU does as far as digital issues are concerned together with the US in terms of cooperation is, of course, partly done in multilateral fora, not surprisingly, but there are bilateral fora as well, which are quite interesting to look at. There is the Trade and Technology Council, the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, where you have issues like technology standards that are discussed, investment screenings that are discussed, export controls and cooperation on that is discussed, the misuse of technology also, for instance. So there you have different topics rather related to the digital economy that are debated and where there is a cooperation planned. And then you also have the joint tech competition policy dialogue, but it merged a bit into the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council. And then you have the EU-US Cyber Dialogue. Until now, the minor forum, I'd say. So the main forum would be the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council. And the EU-US Cyber Dialogue rather focuses on cybersecurity, cybercrime, human rights in cyberspace also, of course, and global capacity building. So you would have those two fora that are very important. And another important aspect are, of course, the data exchanges. There we now have the data privacy framework in place. Max Schrems already says it won't hold. He's not the only one. So you might want to delve into that as well. It's an interesting issue and a very important issue, obviously, for digital trade and for the digital economy. The data flows between our two regions. And an interesting angle, of course, is also this triangle EU, US, China. So that's also very interesting to delve into. China is very important, obviously, for the US and for the US's external digital policy. And for the EU as well, maybe not as much. And the EU is maybe a bit more, there are dividing lines within the EU. Let's put it like that. That would be the next point that might be interesting. Those dividing lines within the EU in the sense of different DGs having different objectives because they have different competencies. I'm now alluding to Thierry Breton and Vestager having different objectives, having different levels of protectionism, I'd say. And so that's interesting. The other dividing line is also that, as you all know, foreign policy is actually it's member state competence. And with the digital foreign policy, it's actually the same. So member states have their own digital policies, external digital policies as well. Some more, some less, and also with different objectives. So there again, we have some dividing lines that are interesting to look into. So that would be a kind of an overview so that you know what's going on and where you might want to know more maybe and where you want to delve into.
Great, thanks for this walkthrough, the main key points from digital foreign policy of the EU, and Christian can maybe say a couple of words about the crisis response and emergency use of technology in emergency cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you as well for having me here and for your invitation. Despite the fact we are a quite cozy panel, we just right before figured out that we very well complement each other towards the topic we are addressing here in this panel. Thank you for the introduction. I mean, from my academic background, I think you hardly can grasp what I do for a living. So since 10 years, I work in research management. In the defense research domain, so in the Austrian Ministry of Defense, in the Science Research and Development Division, but also since some 6-7 years for the Ministry of Science, managing a research cluster that you introduced that is facilitating in Austria the third mission of universities. As some of you might know, they have their two main objectives, universities, teaching and research, and the third mission is knowledge and technology transfer, and that is another hat that I'm wearing, and for the specific field of security and disaster research. And given the regulations that you touched upon, I want to first start addressing more a very specific and quite burning topic, which is in the defense domain. I mean, we are navigating through multiple crises and conflicts, starting from pandemics, natural hazards and disasters, as well as the conflicts around our Austrian, our European borders right now, and that is opposing actually a quite valid basis for our research policy and incentives that are being set out by the EU and of course also by national governments. And but maybe some of you have heard about the European Defence Fund, which is a specific research program that is addressing research and development with EU budget in this multi-annual financial framework of the Commission. 8 billion are invested in this 7-year period to enhance joint military capabilities in Austria through science, research, and development. These 8 billions are 1/3 goes into specific research, and 2/3 actually are addressed development. And that's I'm mentioning this because this in history of EU has never happened before, where budget is dedicated to actually enhance research results towards quite market-ready solutions in the specific fields. And that is a budget that is just next to our Horizon Europe research budget that is the biggest globally, not only the last framework program with 80 billion. Now we are at some 95.5 billion that the EU is investing in research, plus 5 more for next generation EU, so some side effects to facilitate impact of research, and that is very significant. And just allow me a couple of points to address about the history of this European Defence Fund, so that for those of you that haven't heard about it, how and why it actually has been established, it goes back to the governing era of Trump, 2015, 2016. Jean-Claude Juncker was setting out the declaration on EU defense. It was a result of Trump's more or less statement towards the EU to invest more into being able to defend their territory, their own, and that actually led to a whole mechanism of activities in the defense and security and foreign policy domain, from publishing the EU global strategy, the EU Defense Action Plan, and in the end, in 2018-19, already first hundreds of millions that have been started in the so-called preparatory action on defense research. So as soon as a framework program is starting, the Commission always launches it with preparatory actions in order to see and facilitate opening up a new domain of activities in our concern in the research field, and the further industrial development program. So as a precondition for the European Defence Fund that we have now in this period of 2021 and 2027, and we will talk about that later, what specific areas it is addressing, but it really aims at enhancing EU's defense industrial technology base, so the capabilities that are in the industry in EU to be more independent from the US, to be more independent from China. There are certain regulations that came on top of this defense fund, third-party regulations that are quite unique, that we do not have in traditional research, that actually say that only EU entities are allowed to apply for funding. So there is very strong focus on how they look into applicants, if they have any kind of connection, linked third parties or enterprises with the US or with third countries. So quite interesting, and I'm happy to go into detail a bit further in several aspects of that.
Thank you, Christian. And I think the clear nexus which emerges here is that we see that at one point there are these dividing lines, and there may be, to a certain extent, lack of cohesion between the European actors, state actors, in terms of their perception of technology, their level of integration with global innovation. And on the other hand, there is not all of the, and I would say like, clearly not all of the innovation is centered in the EU, and it's not so easy to become independent and stay on top of technological development, which is so needed, not only in terms of conveniences of our lives, but also as strategic tools. So I wanted maybe you first, Elke, to expand a little bit more on how EU's domestic digital policies, maybe member state digital policies, particularly in regarding privacy and maybe economical consideration, trade considerations, shapes its external relations with other states, maybe setting certain standards, contributing to global regulatory frameworks, and at the same time, maybe then Christian can follow up with the comment on the ever-evolving kind of technology of AI and autonomous system, and how these shape diplomatic consideration, how these call for more enhanced cooperation while not compromising on independence, how these used in crisis response and in defense efforts. So kind of this double-sided question.
So as I mentioned before, there on the one hand there are the different DGs having different objectives. So there you have dividing lines, and then sometimes a lack of coherence, or it's more difficult then to speak with a single voice for the EU. Also in digital issues. The member states. I think it works again. Yeah, it does. So you have member states that are more active in their external digital policy, like France, for instance, who is particularly working on its own digital industry also. Again, furthering a more protectionist and Europeanist perspective versus a Atlanticist one. Then, as I said, the different DGs with the different objectives, of course, that makes it also difficult. And what the EU tried to do 2022 already, and again in 2023, with council conclusions on its digital diplomacy, is to be more coherent. Because you have those different responsibilities and competences concerning digital in different DGs. You have the DG Interpa when it comes to Africa, also on digital issues there. You have the DG Connect for global capacity building, and therefore also, for instance, in Africa, active in policies towards Africa. You have the EEAS, obviously, for digital diplomacy as well. Within those, again, you have then people who rather focus on digital trade and the economic issues, those focusing on cybersecurity. You have that within DG Connect, you have that within EEAS. So you have very many different people working on those issues. And with those council conclusions on the EU's digital diplomacy, the EU tried to become more coherent. Concerning the member states, with the so-called Team Europe approach, meaning that even if the different member states have their own policies, what they should do is cooperate and coordinate more, obviously. And what you also find in those conclusions is the wish to foster a more strategic approach. Like, this is a sign already in this direction of learning the language of power. We've heard that in other spheres as well, so the same in the digital sphere. Also concerning the Global Gateway, for instance, which is a large investment program in the Global South, also in Africa. Investments in infrastructure, not only digital, but very much also digital infrastructure. And there should also be a strategic component. So this is not a mere or 100% development approach anymore, but more of a strategic one, which is quite understandable. I touched upon the EU, US, China angle already in this triangle. China is very active in Africa, for instance, also concerning digital infrastructure. And what China then does by this is also, with the export of software, surveillance systems, etc., to export as well its values, because those digital tools are based on certain values. And of course, this is very welcome, partly by certain authoritarian regimes in Africa. And of course, the EU wants to counter this together with the US. So this is also, for instance, part of the EU-US cyber dialogue. Also, this capacity building in the global South together. So there are already projects in Kenya, for instance, as far as I know, with the US together. So what is done here is also countering China's influence. So because there we see the norms behind those digital tools are very important geopolitical tools also. And there also, you see that this importance of standard setting and of norms also, what's happening in the ITU, where again you also have EU and US working together, China being extremely active. So the former Secretary General was Chinese, now we've got a US American Secretary General and a woman. We've got the Women in Tech panel at the same time, right? So there we've got a female Secretary General. We see that there was a Chinese was Secretary General, and what the Chinese also did is that they placed their people in different very important working groups. One working group was even steered by Huawei. So there you see that there is a great influence. What the Chinese also suggested via the ITU is a more centralized form of management of the internet, meaning that there would also be a more fragmented internet, nationally governed, rather state-led than a multi-stakeholder model. So this is what they tried, for instance, via the ITU, together with the Russians. And we see that there, EU and US are working together and also trying to reach out to African diplomats, of course, to vote with them. Also, for instance, with the new Secretary General, because there were two candidates, Russian candidate and the US-American candidate, and there was much activity actually on the side of EU diplomats talking to Africans to vote with them for the US-American candidate. So very much is going on there as well, as far as geopolitics is concerned. Yeah, and since you also said in how far domestic regulation then has an effect, so this is the realm of the EU actually, right, where you have regulations that are actually domestic regulations for the digital single market of the EU. For instance, now the DSA, the DMA, Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act. And before the GDPR, where this term Brussels effect came up by Anna Bradford, where we have this de jure and de facto Brussels effect, where some countries even took the GDPR as a model and then had their own law modeled after the GDPR, but also the de facto Brussels effect, of course, where global companies would say, okay, there are EU rules now, those are very strict, those are the strictest actually, we take those and those are the rules for us in all the other countries. Because having to stick to different rules, it wouldn't make any sense financially, it would cost even more for those companies, so they would take the strictest rule and then stick to those. So and now we have the DSA, the DMA, DSA concerning content rules and DMA concerning competition. Again, something that is, of course, and globally important, has an external effect, obviously, especially important for the US, since most of the digital companies, the big digital companies, are US companies. And so there we have a clear external effect, and there are guessings going on already in how far this will also be the fact with the AI Act, this Brussels effect, if that would work out in that sphere or not. So we have very much this actually implicit external policy of the EU, so to speak, where you have domestic regulations that have a very strong external effect.
So, Christian, would you say that there is the same dynamics going on in terms of direct technology implication? Is there the same strong push from certain states in the EU, and do they spread their influence via producing maybe certain technologies or implementing them? Yeah, and how is it used in crisis situations? This influence from domestic politics to foreign policy to influence of foreign actors.
Thank you. That was a couple of questions, so I'm trying to address them well. So maybe first also complementing on what Elke has mentioned, there is also in the specific defense domain another regulation, the ITA regulation, International Traffic in Arms regulations, that for us as EU member states quite relevant, because it for the industry it regulates actually that there are no components produced somehow, whatever, outside the EU. So this is a specific regulation that is also set out in and it's quite relevant for technological independence and strategic autonomy of the EU as a region. And it's linked also to the European Defence Fund, what I has mentioned. So coming back to crisis management and new technologies to be used, what you have mentioned. I have the pleasure to be working also in an expert pool for the United Nations. It's called UNDAC system, United Nations Disaster Assessment Coordination Teams. It's like a pool of people globally, some 450 people we are, that is registered in Geneva in some list. And whenever a crisis strikes and the country is requesting assistance, then I'm actually getting just a message, there is in Madagascar floods and they are deploying a team, and are you ready? And then I say yes, no, and usually after, if I get selected, after 6 to 12 hours, there is a flight ticket and off we go. And I'm saying this because that for me was always this crisis management role in international environment was always also a bit of a diplomatic dimension. And I'm remembering 2014 it was, I was in the Balkans, in Bosnia and Serbia, deployed to manage that huge flood along the Sava River that has happened and flooded actually minefields that so a post-war region. So not only direct impact of flood, but also all those cascading effects that you have in that situation. And at that time, it was mentioned also in cybersecurity session earlier, the Copernicus satellite imagery system of the European Commission was just established, and the infrastructure was there. Now it's quite often used and activated already. So member states can just request, based on a 24 to 48 hours rhythm, satellite imagery with a very high resolution. And we used that at that time to get an overview of the flooded situation. It was the first time actually we worked with these. At the time it was like huge walls of maps that have been printed. Imagine that in Bosnia. Yeah? So how do you deal with that kind of my wife is actually from there, so no offense with the country there, and that was for me personally a milestone in figuring out how you actually communicate and deal with the use of new technologies in a quite challenging disaster, where you actually work in a cafe that is flooded and they just emptied that bar, and you meet there then regularly with people from management, from government, and whatnot. So and that is now a technology that is kind of standard to be used. And I'm mentioning this example because for us now, what is also will become even more standard is AI. Latest since ChatGPT, I think almost every one of us has somehow looked it up and tried to ask some question or whatnot to the website. And this, I think, will be a big driver also in tech diplomacy, because it will allow simultaneous, I don't know, negotiations and very real-time information and processing of huge loads of data sets. And another key enabling technology for crisis management is that we are facing now already is autonomous systems. So the autonomy of robotic systems such as some ground robots or drones will and is just becoming or increasing more and more. I mentioned satellite imagery, so the whole space domain is something that we will have to consider in future as a similar domain of operation, just as, I don't know, we go on a crusade or land or the digital domain. So there is and you were asking what countries in Europe are actually driving certain technologies, and I think it's quite obvious. A very big player in this domain is France and Germany. But what we figured out now, speaking from a perspective of the Ministry of Defense and managing this huge amount that is there to develop defense capabilities in the EDF, there are several countries that have specific niche interests because of course there are certain companies and industry that are very competitive and international, well established. There is Sweden. There is also the Netherlands. They have those 4 countries are from an Austrian perspective very much driving, and you see that also in the statistics of not only the defense research but also the general research results, where actually a lot of money goes to. But I can say, as an Austrian, we are not that far behind. So we have a huge potential. I think that also comes because we are quite flexible in our research policy and industrial management. So we are very diverse, and I think as a country often have been we had to adapt to certain circumstances in general, and that you can see. So this defense research has been established, as I said, 2018-19, and now some 5 years afterwards, we really see an increase in participation and very valuable taxpayers' money that we actually take back. Another couple of technologies that are quite relevant is sensing technologies that is quite connected to material research. So there are new materials, hybrid materials coming up that will also have a disruptive impact into crisis management and diplomacy as well. And of course, the whole biotechnology domain. We are speaking of technologies that enable human performance enhancement and optimization. So things that are science fiction from maybe our point of view are now quite realistic. Genetic scissors, so genomics and research will will be a future challenge very much, and therefore I think it's important that we set also the right regulations in that. If we just think, if someone have heard about Elon Musk and his
neural chip.
Yes, neurochip that was just recently been implemented. I mean, this is maybe still we have no clue on what impact this would have in future, because the digital divides, data privacy concerns us, and as long as we are not fully aware of what the new technologies can bring, it's could be still quite hazardous as well.
Yeah, fascinating, thank you. And coming back to maybe technologies which are not so science fiction, and also geopolitical factors in them. So you mentioned Huawei, and it's a great case, I think, for us to look at. For example, they were very recently kicked out of the project in Romania in terms of implementing 5G stations, right? And this is something that people in countries like Austria, having almost full country covered entirely in 5G, but other member states not being, and then, Chinese company is very influential, such as Huawei, winning fair and square tenders due to cost efficiencies, and then they're kicked out of probably more security implications and considerations coming from Brussels. So the question is, how do these geopolitical considerations influence such decisions on cooperation, on technology exchange, compared also with economic considerations, right? So is it, like, how much of it is about security, how much of it is about power politics, also a great keyword that you mentioned, or it's about being, economically prosperous and leading with your own product, with your own station, with your own workers, putting these technologies in place?
Yeah, I think those issues intertwine, right? You mentioned 5G, 6G. I start with that. Or maybe before I do that, I just comment a bit on what Christian said. Since you also talked about autonomous weapons, I just wanted to shortly tell you about the EU's position, which is maybe not surprising, but still. Is the EU's position on those autonomous weapons is that it's still, of course, international law, international humanitarian law, human rights have to be applied, and that the framework that should be used is still the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, that it's still this framework that should be applied, and that in the end it should always be a human being that takes a decision concerning life and death, and not an AI. And thus also this person would be accountable, so that not, because this is also a great problem, who is accountable then, yeah? What do we do with accountability if an AI actually takes a decision? I just wanted to add that. And maybe also concerning AI, there is the AI Act of the EU, which is not in force yet, but there is political agreement already. So we know what's in there already. The industry is not very satisfied because there are 4 risk categories which are not very clear. So it might be then difficult for the industry to apply that. Maybe delegated acts will be necessary to clarify those points. We'll see. And what I also wanted to touch upon is that concerning AI and regulation of AI, there are like 2 main approaches, so to speak. The approach that one focuses rather on the imminent dangers, meaning a focus on transparency, on data biases, which is rather the EU's approach, and the approach that one should rather focus on the more distant future, where there might be other, maybe bigger dangers, more in the direction of national security, which is more the US approach, and also the approach of US companies that they would favor, just to because this is also geopolitically then important, and also there's different views. Now to your question, 5G, 6G, Huawei. Now, this was also more or less US-led, and the EU followed, more or less, so certain countries followed one by one because of security concerns, and also to follow the US, obviously. So this was also one motivation, obviously. And as you were hinting also on other motivations, of course, there is Nokia and there is Ericsson. There are important European companies, and for them it's not that bad, right? If the US wouldn't use Huawei's services and products, and other countries wouldn't either. So there is definitely this economic motivation as well, and an economic interest, not only a security interest. Then for the yes, the yes would rather go in the direction of Open RAN, which would again be better for their digital giants. It would make them even more competitive, not really what the EU wants. So you see there are different economic interests also involved, also different interests of the EU and the US. So it's not only China, but the EU and the US are also not always of the same opinion. What I found out also in my research when doing expert interviews is that in the EU-US cyber dialogue, everything is always fine, they always agree. In the Trade and Technology Council, not so much. So there you see a difference also, where it's more difficult to agree when it comes to the economy than when it comes to cybersecurity, where we more or less also have like a common enemy in China or in Russia. And then maybe related to that, this is not only important concerning 5G, 6G, those geopolitical considerations, but also concerning semiconductors. So this is very complicated because production of semiconductors is very complicated. It's extremely fragmented because it's extremely specialized. So you have different companies in different countries that depend on each other because they would produce just one part first of the machinery that is needed for the semiconductor production, then parts of the semiconductors directly. So there you have different producers, and this is why there are very many interdependencies. And this is also why we've moved from a decoupling approach to a de-risking approach, because decoupling is not possible. Also vis-a-vis China, it's not really possible. But what is important is diversification, so that you really make sure. But again, when you think about it, since you have those very complex supply chains concerning semiconductors, it's very difficult to really organize this in a way that you have for every single part that you need different suppliers. So this is really hard work to be done to have there a strategy. And this is also something where the EU and the US work together in the Trade and Technology Council, the securing of supply chains. And you also have that in the CHIPS Act of the EU. There you also have an early warning mechanism, which is very important in times of crisis, so that you're prepared, or that you really realize very early that there might be a shortage. So those early warning systems are very important, and there is exchange and cooperation between the EU and the US on that as well. And what is also then concerning semiconductors very, very difficult is that when you want to have part of your production in your country or in your region, which is what the US and the EU want. For the EU, the goal is 20% of the market share until 2030, for instance. So in order to achieve this goal, it does take time. This is also why the goal is set for 2030, because to be able to produce a very advanced chip, you need the knowledge, you need the skills. The research funds come in. You need then a whole process that takes very long, according to specialists, sometimes up to 20 years, until you can catch up with somebody like China, for instance, who is then more advanced. Although with semiconductor production, they aren't that much advanced. So those are the issues, that it takes time. So again, decoupling is not possible, but you have to de-risk. You have to rather focus on the supply chains first and diversify them as a first step. And you can only bring like a certain market share of the production then into your country, which is again limited. So you still have the same problem then afterwards also.
Thank you so much. And then, yeah, kind of the same question, right? I mean, these are vital technologies, even if more adopted in, if it would be the same situation in Romania, like you described in Bosnia, right? The 5G coverage would be super important. So where it comes in this interplay of, the compromise of the speedy, technology spread versus we don't want a foreign actor to control such a vital infrastructure.
I mean, that's the so to say, the bottleneck also we live in. On the one hand, countries want to foster technological development and advancements for several reasons. On the other hand, it's quite a challenge to oppose the right regulatory system, and I think that's the unique nexus also with technology diplomacy. If I just think back, I think it was in 2017 where it was Denmark, I remember, who had the first technology diplomat in Silicon Valley. I mean, now there are a couple of hundreds or so there. I mean, it's just 5 years ago. UN Secretary General set out like 2 years ago or so an envoy for technology and so. So I think this is a very important aspect to understand that technology diplomacy or digital diplomacy is very strongly linked also with science literacy. So you have to actually understand what impact you create with policies that you do, but for that you also have to understand the dynamics and challenges that lies within the sector of innovation, so the science research and development sector.
Thank you. So I think we'll take now questions from the audience. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Nicola Schmidt, Institute of International Relations, Prague. I don't have two questions, but two comments, and I would like you, if you can elaborate on them. First of all, you mentioned that the ethical, rule about using AI have to be that the people are making the decisions and not the AI is making the decision. So what I actually think is that the problem is somewhere in the between, because AI is actually not going to make decisions on behalf of us, but AI is going to assist our decisions, and then when you are making decisions based on assisted AI, then you are not analyzing the situation properly, because it saves your time when the AI is actually analyzing the situation for you. And what I'm surprised that in the debates about the ethical consideration of AI, this problem is actually not too much analyzed, because there is a huge continuum. It's like a fuzzy logic. You don't have 0 and 1. You have, the relative numbers somewhere in between these two extremes, the right and wrong, and the normative assessment of the situation is quite complicated. So if you can elaborate on that. And the second thing was about the technology that augments the human body. What's actually going to be the revolution now is that we are going to have chips which will be accepted by the human body. So we are not going to need to have, say, new hand, and the body will need to accept it. We will just hang our hand on our body, and we will control it through the chip in the brain. And so the revolution of success seems to be that the brain is not is accepting the chip. And what surprised me again, we all the time talk about Elon Musk, but there is at least a dozen companies around the world which are successful at the same time as Neuralink. And one of them is, I think, coming from the UK. It's called, I also remember the Neuralink mostly because we talk about it. But I think, this is also a revolution, that we found the materials, the proper materials, which we can use to develop the silicon-based chips, which the body is accepting. So what do you think about it related to European defense?
Okay, this is a wide question. Let's first comment on this, and then we talk more. Please, whoever first.
So,
I think the first was more.
okay, yeah, sure. Then I'll start. If you allow, I just want to add a few more points that just popped up in my head, what Christian mentioned, and then I come immediately to your question. This will be quickly done. I noted this down. This was one of your, I think it was your second comment, and I just thought I just quickly want to comment on that also. You mentioned open strategic autonomy, and I found that also very interesting, which terms different DGs use, because that would be typical for Vestager. Open strategic autonomy, but Breton wouldn't like it and would rather use the term digital sovereignty. A term many people use with different definitions, but I was thinking about that, and I find it interesting, like with which terms people then would describe similar issues. Right. This was actually the only thing that I just quickly wanted to add to your question now. Of course, it's very complex. It's not as easy as that. I was just referring to what the EU's official stance is, which is that in the end, a human should make the decision. That this decision is made based on AI. You're right. Then it's partly because it depends on what data the AI then in the end delivers to this person, then taking the decision. Absolutely. Yeah, so this is very complex then to say. And there again, I come back to what I said before with the AI Act already. Industry is not satisfied with the status quo, and if it stays like that for them, it's not very easy to deal with, so to speak. And this is a problem that we always have with such technologies. We try to regulate something that is constantly evolving, that is constantly changing, which is why I was referring also to delegated acts that might be necessary, also concerning the AI Act. So this is what we are confronted with, what we have to face in several technological spheres, not only when it comes to AI, to find a way to regulate something that develops, and we don't know yet where it will be in 2 years' time. So I think this is also the problem that we really have to deal with here, and that this is a difficult issue where you say where does the competence and maybe also accountability of the AI ends, and where does one of the human being starts is there very difficult. But what is this feeds also a bit into what I said before, the different approaches where we now also focus on data bias, for instance, or the EU does. Because this is definitely important for the issue of which data is then presented to the human being taking the decision, because there might be a bias in there. And this is what we try already to regulate.
To answer on Neuralink, I mean, this was mentioned because it's obvious, and in media, I fully agree. There are, and in several other technological domains, there are numerous enterprises and companies that are very valuable. And just thinking of Google speech recognition, the root algorithm actually comes from Linz. Yeah, I don't know if you from Austria. What I want to say with that is there are several innovations that in the recent decades, they came actually from civil applications. In the previous history, if we think of why technologies have been developed, yeah, gunpowder, airplanes, trains, was actually always for a military reason. So in times of post-Second World War peace, more or less, this changed a lot. Yeah? So technological development came from a civil purpose. Yeah? If we think of how we use GPS now, that was invention of a military concern. But as this has changed over the past 25 years, the European Defence Fund or the defense domain, we figured actually out that civil solutions don't meet fully the requirements of military application, of military capability development. So given this whole change of global powers, the EU set out this European Defence Fund to change the way the industry is actually approaching technological development. So with the EDF, we more or less, as regulators that are setting out what are the priorities, define for what purpose, for what applications certain technologies will be funded. So thinking of human enhancement, if you just set out a call for 45 million per project, this is a huge incentive that allow certain research in one direction. If this would not be the case, just by an open research program, I think we would maybe need to wait a couple of years once someone is actually approaching this. So that's what I want to add, why certain things are and what the deeper meaning also of defense incentives is in the research domain.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we can take both, I think. Sure.
Hi, Sean Roberts. I'm MISE1 here at the DA, and I had 3 points that I wanted to quickly bring up. One of them was you were saying that part of the issue with the AI making decisions in regards to military technologies was having trouble holding somebody accountable, but we already are having trouble holding people accountable. There's 2 wars that are ongoingly being heavily debated as being illegal, currently going on. And even in those cases, it's usually not like individual soldiers who are being tried for issues. It's going to be the actual upper level decision makers. And as a bit of a devil's advocate position, you could actually end up with less civilian casualties with the use of AI, because like in the situation in Gaza, if they had better technology for actually locating who they were looking for, then you're reducing the extra damage from happening. One of the things that I've thought about multiple times today, though, keeps getting brought up, the superconductor supply and the need for access to materials and supplying. Are there any concerns regarding the actual manufacturing of them and the fact that it wouldn't be able to be competitively produced here without a severe reliance on a subsidized production? And otherwise, yeah, for him, I just wanted to say, very good. I like the idea of more defense funding because, yeah, basically everything we've enjoyed over the last, like, 50 years has all been out of defense funding.
Thanks, and please.
Hello, my first question goes to Mr. Resch, and it's about, aren't we like focusing on the wrong things? Because right now, if we look to Ukraine, the most decisive weapons for them is not like the most funky new marketing technology. And actually what Ukraine right now needs is more like artillery shells and simple things as tanks and other. So basically they're all more or less relying on conventional technology that already exists for several decades, but it's not really like the most sophisticated one. So shouldn't we, instead of just investing in new technology for defense purposes, just invest in the already existing technology and increase production output for this one? And the second question would be regarding data mining, especially because now we know with data mining, it's like if we aggregate data about people as much as possible, it's possible to micro-target people and to influence them through this information campaign and so on. And this is especially important because there have been like 4 different agreements between the United States and the European Union. I think one is called Privacy Shield. And basically what they all have together is that the European Court of Justice always struck them down because they were violating European law and they were not protecting the data rights of European citizens. Isn't there also like a risk from like a Western democratic side that the United States could weaponize this technology or information against the European Union, against European democracies?
Thank you so much. You want to go first?
To briefly maybe already answer both. So conflicts nowadays compared to wars that we know and remember from the past, be it Iraq, Afghanistan, or Yugoslavia, we call them hybrid. So you don't have a traditional battlefield anymore where a battalion commander is giving an order and you have then some, I don't know, squad leader that is then executing and I don't know, shooting or firing something. So threat pictures and wars, and we see it in Ukraine, they are operating in, we call it multi-domain operations. So you have the whole cyber domain, you have information. While soldiers are shooting at each other, you will have cyber operations that are sending fake information and disinformation campaigns to a whole population. Whereas in these conflicts, there are still the traditional impacts of a war that we had decades ago that brings us down that basic needs are also still there existing. So on the one hand, the needs in such conflicts now and in the future, they will always be quite, let's say, complex. So you will always need to ensure that they have communication. We saw it with again, Elon Musk ensuring that there is a satellite communication in Ukraine. And that brings me to one important part that was not in previous conflicts also the case, is the role of the private sector actually in these conflicts. If you have an enterprise that is able to just turn on and off your communication system, this has a huge huge effect on these battlefields nowadays. Just there is a couple of more to say, but look at the time.
Elke, you want to also take some of the questions?
So I start with the last question. I think that was your question concerning the Privacy Shield. The Privacy Shield has been invalidated in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. We now have a new framework, the Data Privacy Framework, the DPF. Again, with, well, what is different now is that there is a redress mechanism. So if you, as a EU citizen, feel that your data is unlawfully collected by the US, you can address a court, the Data Protection Review Court. So you have this possibility as a EU citizen now. This is what changed, which according to Max Schrems, for instance, this is still not enough. We already have an MEP, a French MEP, Philippe Latombe, who says exactly the same thing, who actually applied already for the annulment of the DPF already, because there is still one problem, and this is what you were alluding to, I think, or what your question was actually about, is that bulk surveillance is still possible. According to Section 702, it is, of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Services Act, I think is where the abbreviation stands for. And according to this section, it's still possible for the US to have bulk surveillance of foreign citizens. So this is still possible. There you're right, and this is still the problem that still exists. It was the problem of the Privacy Shield. It was before it was a Safe Harbor Agreement, exactly the same problem. It was this section that was the problem, and that still is an issue. And even with this court that now exists, the problem is that it's not really a court. It's rather part of the executive than the judicative. So there again, you have a problem. So it is quite probable that it again won't hold. It will again be invalidated. Then we had the question on semiconductors and subsidies. Yes, this is the issue, that subsidies will be needed, which is part of the CHIPS Act of the EU and also the US's CHIPS Act, by the way. So there they also try to coordinate to not have a subsidy race, but this is what they will do and what their goal is. Then your question concerning that there might be even fewer civilian casualties. Yes, sure. I'm communicating here the official stance of the EU, which is still this one. So and this is how they justify it, that there is a human being behind that is that is accountable rather than an AI. But I completely agree with you. This is an ethical concern that is that complex. I think it will still take a while until we have a solution. Right.
Thank you so much. I think sadly, we're out of time at the moment. That clock is a little bit behind from what I see. But I think there are many more topics we could discuss, definitely, and we're getting onto some very interesting stuff. Thank you, the audience, also for the questions. If I was to draw kind of a conclusion to what we talked about, it seems like the European foreign digital policy is kind of like a full-speed freight train at the moment with its dynamics. And it's already a little scary on the straight line, and we should hope not to derail it on the curve. That is the crisis situation that we face globally today. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.